Mitre Square was the kind of place you passed through, not a place you stopped. A cold, angular courtyard tucked between warehouses, shops, and the looming walls of the City of London. At 1:44 a.m. on September the 30th, 1888, the square sat empty, silent, except for the shudder of the wind and the drip of rain from a broken gutter. A police constable had walked through minutes earlier. Nothing. No one. And then, in less than the span of a single cigarette, everything changed. A woman, small, worn, but defiant in the way only someone who has survived too much can be, lay on the cold stones, her life taken with terrible speed and terrible precision. Her name was Catherine Eddowes, but to those who loved her, she was Kate. She had a sharp wit, a clever mind, a stubborn streak that both saved her and harmed her in equal measure. Tonight, we step into her story, not the myth, not the sensational headlines, but who she really was, and how she came to die in one of the darkest corners of Victorian London. Welcome back to The Eclectic. I'm your host, and tonight, in our series, The Women of Whitechapel, we meet a woman whose life was full of intelligence, resilience, heartbreak, and defiance. Catherine Eddowes is often remembered only as the second victim of the Rippers' double event. But Catherine was more than that, far more. She wrote ballads, a singer, a fighter, a survivor of poverty, addiction, and the brutality of life in the East End. Her story deserves to be heard clearly, fully, and without judgment. In this series, we do not focus on the killer. We do not glorify his violence. Instead, we restore voice and dignity to the women he targeted. Women whose lives were shaped not by their deaths, but by their humanity. Tonight, we explore the life of a woman whose final hours are amongst the best documented of all the Whitechapel victims. But before Mitre Square, before the headlines, before the horror, there was Kate. Catherine Eddowes, or Kate to her friends, was born in Graiseley Green, Wolverhampton, on the 14th of April 1842. She was the sixth of 12 children born to George Eddowes and Catherine. George was a tin plate worker, a skilled job for those times, especially before machinery was brought in to take over. It was often better paid than agricultural jobs. His wife Catherine worked as a cook at the Peacock Hotel. Kate's childhood was marked by poverty and heartache, but not despair. Kate was known to be lively, quick-witted, and sharp-tongued, a girl who questioned authority and made others laugh. When Kate was a year old, her family moved to London, settling in Bermondsey. Her father found work with a firm called Perkins and Sharpless in Bell Court. Kate attended school at St John's Charity School in Pottersfield, unusual for a girl of her class. She became literate, articulate, and politically aware. She stayed at St John's until the untimely death of her mother Catherine in 1855. Her mother had started to feel unwell. She was coughing and had a fever. The fever would not go away. Catherine deteriorated, and by November 1855, she passed away after battling tuberculosis, known as consumption in those days. This was a debilitating disease with no known cure. Kate became motherless, and by 1857, her father George had also passed. Kate was sent back to Wolverhampton to live with her Aunt Emma in Bilston Street. It is whilst here that she continued her education at Dowgate Charity School and obtained employment at the Old Hall Works as a tin plate stamper. Of all her younger siblings, Kate was the lucky one, having relocated to Wolverhampton to be with her aunt. She was saved from entering the Bermondsey workhouse, which was the fate of 3 of her siblings. Kate wasn't simply surviving. She was learning, observing, becoming. Her friends described her as humorous, fiery, intelligent, stubborn, imaginative. She wrote ballads, often political, sometimes cheeky, and sold them on the streets. This wasn't a woman drifting through life. This was a woman with presence. But poverty is relentless, and life in Victorian England had a way of turning promise into struggle. When Kate was about 21, she met and fell in love with Thomas Conway, a military pensioner from the 1st Battalion of the 18th Royal Irish Regiment. Conway, whilst in the regiment, was stationed over in India for 2 years. It is believed that due to the extreme heat and harsh conditions, this led to Conway's discharge and subsequent award of a small regimental pension. The first few years with Thomas, Kate travelled and lived a nomadic lifestyle. They never married, but to all intents and purposes, they seemed contented. They lived together for over 2 decades and had 3 children in that time, a girl called Annie and 2 boys. Kate often referred to herself as Kate Conway. She even had the initials TC crudely tattooed in blue ink on her left forearm, a rare gesture of devotion at the time. But their relationship, like so many forged in poverty, was unstable. Domestic abuse, which in those days was part and parcel of life. Before moving to London in 1868, Kate and Conway travelled the country, selling cheap novels, gallows ballads, poems and broadsides. It was a kind of battered, wandering, creative life, hard but adventurous. Conway believed that he could be the next Shakespeare after he and Kate wrote a successful ballad for a hanging that took place in 1866. This was a ballad about the hanging of Kate's cousin, Charles Robinson, who had murdered his wife. However, after moving to Westminster and London, Conway soon found that he was not going to be successful. There were writers and singers all over London. The competition was tough. Due to this, he had to, when he was able to, go into physical labour to support his family. These jobs were often up north, and Conway would travel between London and the north. During this time, their partnership began to break down. Years of hardship, physical abuse had worn them down. Kate had turned to alcohol to cope with the abuse from Conway, and she was arrested in 1876 and 1877 for drunken disorderly conduct. Eventually, the relationship fractured under the pressures of alcoholism, financial instability, displacement, hunger, and abuse. By the early 1880s, Kate had left Conway and relocated to the east of London, where she began a relationship with a man called John Kelly, a quieter, more stable man who truly cared for her, completely the opposite to Conway. John Kelly was a fruit salesman who came from Ireland. They were together for 7 years, up until her death. Kate never escaped poverty. She tried, she fought, she worked hard. Her health declined, her drinking worsened, and eventually she found herself lodging in the heart of the East End. Kate and John Kelly often stayed at Cooney's lodging house on Flower and Dean Street, one of London's most notoriously criminal rookery, and one of the roughest streets in London. She earned money however she could, whether that was cleaning, charring, sewing, selling pamphlets, and with Kelly they earned money with seasonal hop picking up in Kent. But what stood out most was her spirit. Even in poverty, Kate joked. She teased, she entertained, she sang. She made people laugh in rooms where laughter was often the last thing anyone expected. She wasn't defined by her circumstances. She pushed against them. Yet alcohol was both her comfort and her downfall. And on the 29th of September 1888, it shaped the last hours of her life. Late summer in England was hop-picking season, and in September 1888, Kate and Kelly headed to Hunton near Maidstone in Kent to try their luck. En route, they purchased a jacket and a pair of boots from a pawnbroker in Maidstone. Whilst working the hops, they became acquainted with another couple, Emily Birrell and her common-law husband, the four sharing a barn at night time. When the harvest had ended, Kate and Kelly headed back to London on foot. Birrell and her partner were heading to Cheltenham, but before they parted company, Birrell gave Kate a pawnbroker's ticket for a shirt. She said to Kate, "I've got a pawn ticket for a flannel shirt. I wish you'd take it since you're going to London. It is only for 4D, and it may fit your old man." Eddowes placed this ticket inside a small mustard tin she carried. Later, this ticket will be found on her body. At 8 a.m, on the 29th of September, Kate and Kelly met near Cooney's lodging house, and Kate took a pair of Kelly's boots to a pawnbroker on Church Street named Jones. She pawned the boots under the name of Jane Kelly for the price of a meal. Frederick Wilkinson saw Eddowes and Kelly later, between 10 and 11 a.m, having breakfast in Cooney's kitchen. Still completely broke, the hunt began for money, for food and lodging for the rest of the day. In the early afternoon of the 29th of September, Kate told Kelly that she intended to travel to Bermondsey to see her daughter Annie and borrow money. Annie, by this point, was married to a gunmaker, Louis Phillips. She spent time trying to avoid her mother, as Kate always asked for money. Kate and Kelly parted company in Houndsditch at about 2 p.m. Kate expected to be back from Bermondsey by 4 p.m. Kelly was worried about separating from her and reminded her of the killer. By this point there had been 2 victims. Kate reportedly told Kelly, "Do not fear for me. I'll take care of myself, and I shan't fall into his hands." It is unclear as to what happened exactly after they parted. Annie stated she did not see her mum that day, but at some point she began drinking heavily. 8:30 p.m. P.C. Robinson saw a group of people gathered outside 29 Aldergate High Street. Approaching the crowd, he saw Kate lying drunk on the pavement. She was severely intoxicated, to the point that when P.C. Robinson helped her to her feet and leaned her against the shop shutters, she promptly slid back onto the pavement. P.C. Robinson called his colleague, P.C. Simmons, to help him take her into custody for her own safety. Not as a punishment, but more as a preventative measure. Standard for the era. Upon arrival at the station, Kate gave her name as Nothing when asked. Within 20 minutes of entering the police cell, Kate fell asleep. P.C. Hutt was tasked with keeping an eye on Kate that evening and passed by her cell several times as she slept. At about 12:15 a.m, Kate had woken and was heard singing softly to herself by P.C. Hutt. 15 minutes later, Kate called to P.C. Hutt, asking when she would be allowed to leave. "When you can take care of yourself," Hutt called, to which Kate replied, "I can do that now." At 12:55 a.m, Kate is deemed to be sober and able to leave the station. Before leaving, she gives her name as Mary Ann Kelly and gave her address as 6 Fashion Street. She leaves the station at 1 a.m. "What time is it?" she asks P.C. Hutt. "Too late for you to get anything to drink," he replies. "I shall get a damn fine hizing when I get home," she tells him. Hutt replies, "And serves you right. You had no right to get drunk." Hutt opens the swinging door of the station, saying, "This way, missus. Please put it to." Kate left the station and, looking back, simply replied, "All right. Good night, old cock." She turned left out of the doorway, which took her in the opposite direction and away from the fastest route back to Flower and Dean Street. When Kate left Bishopgate Station, she walked west toward Houndsditch and Aldgate High Street. The streets were quiet. The pubs were closing. The night watchmen were making their rounds. This was the dead zone between night and morning, the hour when the East End held its breath. 1:30 a.m, the last confirmed sighting. PC Edward Watkins of the City Police passed through Mitre Square on his route. He passed through every 12 to 14 minutes. He had a lantern fixed to his belt. He saw nothing unusual, no people, no shadows, just the empty coldness of the square. He would later testify, "The square was perfectly clear when I was there." 1:35 a.m. A man and a woman in the shadows. 5 minutes later, 3 men, Joseph Laund, Joseph Hyam Levy, and Harry Harris, leave the Imperial Club on Duke Street. At the corner of Duke Street and Church Passage, they see a woman talking to a man. The man is described as 30 years old, 5'9", fair complexion with a moustache. He is wearing a pepper and salt coloured jacket with a red neckerchief and a grey peaked cloth cap. The woman is standing facing the man with her hand on his chest. She does not give the impression of being in danger. They look like they are simply talking. Levy was immediately convinced the couple were up to no good. He noted the man looked rough and made a remark he would later regret. He said, "I don't like going home by myself when I see characters like that about." This moment, a fleeting glance between strangers, may have been the last time anyone saw Kate alive, except her killer. 1:40 a.m, back into the dark. From here, the path into Mitre Square would take less than 2 minutes. The square was quiet, lightless, crossroads of alleyways, perfect for someone who knew how to strike quickly and vanish faster. Kate stepped into the square, and the world never saw her alive again. 1:44 a.m. PC Watkins on his route turned out of Leadenhall Street. He strolled along Mitre Street and returned to Mitre Square. He lifted his lantern, moved it across the stones, and then froze. In the southwest corner of the square, just beyond the hoarding of Keeley and Tong's warehouse, lay Catherine Eddowes. She was lying on her back in a pool of blood, with her head resting on a coal hole and turned towards her left shoulder. Her clothes had been thrown up over her waist. PC Watkins raced across the square to Keeley and Tong's warehouse, where he knew retired police officer George Morris was working as a night watchman. He burst through the door crying, "For God's sake, mate, come to my assistance. Here is another woman cut to pieces." Morris quickly follows Watkins out. He takes one look at Kate's body and races along Mitre Street, blowing his whistle as he runs. The whistle brought PC Harvey and PC Holland to the square. Upon seeing the corpse, PC Holland went and fetched a Dr. George Sequeira from his abode in nearby Drury Street. Dr. Sequeira was at the square by 1:55 a.m, and he confirmed that where Kate had been killed was the darkest part of Mitre Square. Death, he said, would have been instantaneous, with the windpipe and blood vessels cut. Sequeira did little more than to pronounce life extinct. He did not touch the body, preferring instead to wait for Dr. Frederick Brown. Brown arrived at approximately 2 a.m. to perform an on-site post-mortem. He noted, Her throat had been cut deeply in the same manner as the other victims. The vessels on the left side of her neck were severed. She had been disemboweled. Her intestines had been placed over her right shoulder, and they had been nicked, releasing smear fecal matter upon the space behind her shoulder. 2 feet of intestine had been detached and placed between her body and left arm. Kate's face had been mutilated. Her left kidney had been removed, and her uterus had been cut horizontally and all but removed except for a 1/4-inch sized stump. Brown surmised at the conclusion of the post-mortem that this murder had been committed by one person, and that he had severed her throat so suddenly that she hadn't had time to cry out. He also stated that whoever had removed the kidney must have some knowledge of where a kidney is located to be able to remove it so quickly in the dark. This attack wasn't chaos. It wasn't frenzy. This was controlled, deliberate, and fast. And it happened in almost complete silence, in an open square, in a patrolled area, with police less than 100 yards away. Kate's life ended brutally, yes, but let this be said clearly. Her death should never overshadow her life. She was more than the violence inflicted upon her. In the frenzy that followed, police swept the surrounding streets. At 2:55 a.m, Constable Long discovered a blood-stained piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron in a doorway on Galston Street, nearly half a mile from Mitre Square. Scrawled on the wall above the apron in chalk was a message. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. Was it written by the killer? By a resident? By someone trying to spark anti-Semitic riots? To this day, no one knows. Commissioner Charles Warren made a controversial decision. He ordered the message be washed off the wall. To prevent riots, he claimed, to stop public panic, to stop anti-Semitic riots as Whitechapel was a melting pot of anti-Semitism. With the removal of the words, it could be argued that a potential piece of evidence vanished, but the words were copied down complete with grammatical errors. The city by this point was shaking, the press was screaming, and somewhere the killer had disappeared back into the maze of alleyways. The press exploded with sensational claims. Experts argued, politicians panicked, and once again, the woman herself was lost beneath the noise. At the inquest, John Kelly confirmed he had identified Kate along with her sister Eliza Gold. He also confirmed that he last saw her at 2 p.m. and that Kate made her living by hawking books. She did not live by immoral purposes. There is much disagreement over whether Kate was a sex worker. Her family and John Kelly deny it. Her friends deny it. But the press and police believed she was. It shouldn't matter whether she was or not. She was a woman whose life was cut short by a murderer, and she deserved justice. And neither Kate or the other victims, or their families, ever received that justice. Jack the Ripper disappeared into the dark that night, able to hide and melt into the background of Whitechapel. To this day, it is always his name that is remembered, and not theirs. He is the bogeyman that people fear and talk about. His victims are reduced to caricatures of the time. Catherine Eddowes was laid to rest on the 8th of October, 1888, at the City of London Cemetery, Ilford. On a service conducted by the Reverend Dunscombe, Her coffin was of polished elmer and bore a plate inscribed with the words, Catherine Eddowes, died September 30th, 1888, aged 43 years. Unlike Elizabeth Stride's funeral, Kate's funeral had numerous people lining the streets as the cortege passed. An estimated 500 people were present as the coffin arrived. Kate was loved. Her family mourned for her, but not as a victim of the Ripper, but as a friend, a partner, a sister, a mother and an aunt they loved. The city moved on quickly, but they didn't. Today, the section of the cemetery where Kate was interred has been reused for part of the memorial gardens for cremated remains. Kate lies beside the garden way in front of the memorial bed. In late 1996, the cemetery authorities decided to formally mark Eddowes' grave with a plaque. Catherine Eddowes' story is often overshadowed by the double event, by the brutality of the crime, by the speed and skill of her killer. But that isn't the legacy she deserves. Her legacy is this. She was clever. She was creative. She was funny. She was flawed. She was human. She wrote ballads. She sang in the streets. She loved fiercely. She tried again and again to survive poverty, grief, illness, and the harshness of Victorian life. She mattered, and she still does. By telling her story with care, we honour not just her memory, but the thousands of forgotten women whose names never made the papers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Women of Whitechapel. Tonight, we stepped into the life and final hours of Catherine Eddowes, a woman whose wit, spirit, and humanity deserve far more attention than the violence that took her life. Next time, we turn to Mary Jane Kelly, the final canonical victim, and the most mysterious of them all. Her story is full of contradictions, shadows, and unanswered questions, but it is also full of possibility, resilience, and tragedy. Until then, stay curious, stay compassionate, and as always, stay eclectic.